Curtis was on the East Coast. The Wright brothers flew, documented, and they ran around for a year or 2 or 3 years trying to sell their patent. They stopped building planes, and it gave Glenn Curtis and Glenn Martin and other eager people the opportunity to start building airplanes, because they just said, wow, this is wonderful, and they just started building airplanes. Do you know how many airplanes that this guy who made the A-1 Triad built from his factory, the Glenn Curtis airplane? Guess how many different models that's listed on the internet when you look at it? Anybody want to guess? 10, 20, 30?
I've got 100.
Yeah, all in production. So they made a couple dozen of these. It basically looked like the Wright Flyer, the one that flew at Kitty Hawk. It had a canard, and does anyone know what a canard? Canard is a French word. What's a canard? Because we're going to talk about canards. It means a duck or a water, because the duck or the goose had a long neck sticking out, and then the head. So this kind of reminded the French of a goose or a duck with a long neck, and then the head up here, or the control, right? The controls were in the front. And we know that if the controls are in the back, it helps with stability. If you have a whole bunch of area up here, then it can make the plane a little bit unstable. And so this is basically kind of a copy of the other bicycle guys. So we had Glenn Curtis kind of copying the Wright brothers. Pretty much the same, pretty much shape as that very first airplane, except he had a more powerful engine, and he had 2 people, and he initially was turning with the ailerons connected to your shoulders, and then he changed it to a wheel, because it was kind of goofy to try to steer with your shoulders. So he basically said, hey, this is a great thing. We got to sell this to somebody with money. Well, today, who's got a lot of money? Government, right? Because they can just tax all of us. So he basically told the Navy, hey, if you get one of my fancy new flying boats, just stuck this pontoon, a little pontoon, and you fly off the carrier, we could take one of your cruisers, put a little wooden deck, fly off the deck and fly out and find the enemy ships. Once you know where they are and they don't know where you came from, then you won the war. In fact, we can even drop a bomb on them and sink their ships, and your ships don't even have to go to battle. And these on our bay, flying from an airport, landing on the water, wenching his plane up, he would put the wheels down, and it's A-1 Triad for 3 things. It would go in the air, land on the land on a runway, or land on the water and taxi up onto the beach. And then, of course, with the floats, it could go on the water. So it was like a frog or amphibian, water and land, but also could fly, like a waterfowl. So that's basically his idea, Triad, air, sea, and land. It could do all 3. And then the Navy says, is this really going to happen? And they said, let's do it. And so he started selling these A-1 Triads. And then the predecessor of this airplane was the Jenny. And let me look at this plane is down in Pensacola, Florida. They have North Island, here in Naval Air Station North Island flying. But after he built these, the predecessor was basically a copy of the Jenny. And they made 6,000 of those. In comparison, the plane I fly is about how it got down to Florida, and they're very proud to have that first naval airplane down in Pensacola. But if you read the notes on the other page, it talks about the challenges they had for maintenance and running these airplanes. There's a nice little discussion right here at the bottom. And it talks about when they would go flying, almost every time they would fly, something would break down. They'd have the engine trouble. They'd blow a cylinder. They would, let me go back up. My click-through links, forgive me, are on a disc sitting on my distinct pleasure of getting to fly it. The planes back then, 100 years ago, were not safe. The very first pilot was this nice fellow Ellison, and he flew a number of airplanes. A couple of his buddies were crashing, and then he actually crashed one of the planes later, and he crashed, and he perished. But fortunately, he had a child, and his granddaughter was here in a wheelchair, and we actually got to fly the A-1 Triad, or I got to fly it. Let's go there. When you read about these guys flying these first airplanes, they weren't safe. So when I got the opportunity to get in the A-1 Triad, I first went out to the museum, and I walked into the museum at El Cajon, and there was about 10 or 15 guys milling around the A-1 Triad, which was downstairs, and they didn't know that I was going to get in the plane and maybe fly it. And I said, oh, look at this, what is this called? And they said, oh, this is the A-1 Triad. And they're telling me about it. I said, is it safe to fly? I said, oh no, you can never fly this, it's dangerous. We have the control yoke, and it just broke off while we were working on it. And they said, I wouldn't trust this. You'd have to be crazy to fly this. I said, well, I might fly this. You're not going to fly this. But I did. If you watch the video, I just flew it. And I was only about 5 or 8 feet off the water. The reason the controls for the A-1 Triad downstairs broke is because they took it out and they flew it for the 75th anniversary. The 2 replicas were made in 1961. That was the 50-year anniversary in 1961. 1911 plus 50. And then they had the 2 replicas. One was here, one was in Washington, D.C., then down in Pensacola, Florida. But the 75th anniversary, they took it out and they flew it, and maybe when they washed it and cleaned it, water got down the tube, which was the control arm. And there was probably 1 or 2 inches of water sitting in the control arm, just sitting. And so when we were out at the North Island across the water here, and they put it in the big hangar, and they had the 100-year celebration of Naval Aviation, the base commander and also Sluggo, Kidrick said, you know, we don't want you to fly because, you know, it's dangerous. And in fact, that very week, a guy named Mr. Pohl was back in Hammondsburg, and that's where this Glenn Curtis bicycle guy came from, who designed. We went out the first day, we just taxied on the water. Then day 2, the engine, the first day it took us about 20 or 30 minutes to start that engine up. Anybody there that day? So the second day we did practice trials, it took about 10 minutes. And then the day of the celebration, where they had Navy pilot number 1, Mr. Ellison, there at the airport, and his granddaughter and great-grandkids, and all the media was there, a bunch of news crew. The engine started within, like, first try. When we started up the engine, it ran, we got in the water, and we taxied around the water, and we're coming into the wind a little bit. I added a little power, and there's little bumps on the water, so we hit a little bump, and I was going straight for the crowd and turned just a little bit, and then pulled back the power and landed. So the plane seemed to fly for those volunteers that built the plane about 40 years ago. The plane, as a replica of one of the very first flying seaplanes, seemed to handle pretty well for the 3 or 5 seconds I got to fly it. And most of you have seen the little video downstairs.
Can I ask a couple questions about the video?
Yeah.
Did they re-rig the airplane some way to fly differently? The controls operate differently?
No, as far as I know, the plane was nearly identical. They used wood. The tail had actually bamboo, which was light and strong, and it was mostly made out of wood. And the fabric wings, and they replaced the bamboo rear fuselage was just bamboo with actually a metal tubes painted to look like bamboo. Is that what is on the plane now?
Someone said they discovered instructions under the seat about how to fly the thing. Do you remember that?
If they did, they never showed them to me.
Really?
And I don't know if they have.
One person said that the instructions said as soon as you get it airborne, it wants to lift up and keep going. And I noticed in the video you can see.
The FAA, they didn't want them to fly it. He said, just taxi it.
The FAA was there and said, don't fly it because you don't have a.
Then he turned the other way.
Right. The FAA was obviously there because after I flew, shortly thereafter, the Blue Angels flew, and the FAA told everyone to stay at 1,000 feet. Seeing as I was getting off the water, they didn't tell me don't go and fly.
Well, when you rotate it, it went up, and then you immediately really push forward on the stick.
So what happens is that you have a new design of pontoons. This is one of the very first things. They just basically put a little fishing skiff there on the bottom, and they had just a flat surface, right? Or even a boat, a curved surface. So when you're going along the water, even a boat, you have a lot of suction on the water. So the way the new planes, pontoons were designed with a little step on it, like an upside down step. So as you rotate, the rear of the tail can go down without hitting the water. So instead of just a flat surface, modern airplanes have a little step here. There's a little bent, just there's a little cut in, and then the rear section is much thinner because you want, going backwards. You have a step here, and then the rear section is thinner, and this is the front of the airplane. So you have what's in the back, which is just like a little step. So on this airplane, we have one in the air. When you take off, this will rotate in, and the back won't dig into the water, but you can still get an angle attack to lift off. Whereas this airplane, you basically go flat on the water. You can't pull the nose, or you're going to dig in the back, and you're going to slow down. You have what's called a little sweet spot, even in a plane with a step in it. You have a sweet spot. If you're pitched too far forward, the plane on the front of the pontoons will dig in, and you have too much resistance. If this was the front of our airplane, and you're taking off, if you put the nose forward, you're going to dig in and have a lot of water resistance. If you pitch the nose up and the tail digs in, so you have kind of a sweet spot to take off. There's really no sweet spot on this. You just have to accelerate, and then you hit a little wake, and once you're in the air, then it will fly off. Because you have all this drag. And the water drag is a huge, huge amount of resistance. If you know, if you're at 18,000 feet in the air, which the air is very thin, and you go down to sea level, the pressure doubles. There's the same amount of air molecules between the sea level to 18,000 feet as 18,000 feet to outer space. If you're at sea level and you go under the water, how long before the pressure doubles again? And feet, fresh water, 33 feet. So 30 feet of water is the same weight of all the air to outer space, right? It's approximately not 70 or 170 or 500, it's 730, 40 times more dense. So when you're flying on the air, and if I'm in my seaplane here, and I put these wheels down, and I land on the runway or take off on the runway, I'm going down the runway, I just have a little friction on the bearings on the wheels, and a little friction on the air, and I can take off in about 20 seconds. On the water, it's 60, 80, 120 seconds because of all that water drag. And again, on the runway, I just have air drag